and I was bleeding and sweating and crying all at the same time. And then my thought was, but if it doesn't get any worse than this, I'm going to survive. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. I'm still thinking. I'm still in control. If it doesn't get any worse than this, I'll be all right. Then they tightened the ropes and it got worse.
Welcome to the Susan Sly Project, where entrepreneurs rule, startups launch, and the side hustle becomes the main hustle. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Susan Sly.
I want to ask you all a question. Do you ever suffer from self-sabotage? Do the thoughts in your mind have more power over your actions, especially the negative ones? Well, my guest spent, it's amazing to me, 2,103 days as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And he's one of the most sought after speakers and authors in the world. He is someone I read about actually well over a decade ago. And I had set the intention that one day I wanted to meet him. So I've been preparing these questions, obviously, for a very long time. He is considered sincere, straightforward, humorous, and tailored to motivate each specific audience he encounters. So the bar is set really high for him. But the thing I want to say about this man is, you know, for the vast majority of people, they can't fathom being shot down and then captured and tortured and imprisoned in an 8x8 cell and then coming out to tell the tale. So my guest today is the one and only Captain Charlie Plumb. Captain Plumb, thank you for being here and thank you for your service.
Susan, it's great to be with you. I'm honored just to be on your program.
Well, thank you. And just so everyone is aware, after this, Captain Plumb is going flying. So we're going to have a rapid fire interview so we can get him out on his airplane. My first question for you is this: why, in your opinion, do you feel people give up hope?
It's all a mindset. That you talk about that a lot. It's a decision to give up hope. And I had a lot of opportunities to give up hope during the nearly 6 years I was a prisoner of war. And I kept talking to myself, and thinking to myself, listen, I'm good enough. I'm strong enough. I can overcome this. In fact, not only can I overcome this problem that I have, that I can emerge from this a better person than I was before I came into this prison camp. And so I kept telling myself that over and over. And when things got tough, the enemy would torture me with ropes and irons and whips, and I just had to keep that in my mind, that it's going to get better than this. I know that it will, and it's all in my mind. It's just a question of the decisions that I make, not the things that surround me, but the decisions that I make about the things that are around me that will create an environment of success for me.
And that is applicable to so many things. I know we have listeners who are perhaps going through chemotherapy. I have one of my employees, his wife is going through red dragon chemo, and she's exhausted and in a lot of pain, but she's so positive. And I love what you said about it being a decision. When you were being tortured, when anyone's under physical pain, they can either amplify that pain by their thoughts and focusing on their pain, or they can focus elsewhere. And all of the clinical studies illustrate that choosing to focus elsewhere actually does numb the body's processing of the pain. So how did you do that?
I set up what I call plateaus of pain. And I would get to a point in those ropes and irons, and I would think, man, this really hurts. This hurts a lot. And I was bleeding and sweating and crying all at the same time. And then my thought was, but if it doesn't get any worse than this, I'm going to survive. I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. I'm still thinking. I'm still in control. If it doesn't get any worse than this, I'll be all right. Then they tightened the ropes and it got worse. And then I said, well, yep, it's worse now, but I'm still alive. I'm still breathing. I still have control. My mind is still active. If it doesn't get any worse than this, I'll be able to survive. And then it got worse. And so I set up these levels of pain, these plateaus, that I would get in, and then believe in myself that, hey, if it doesn't get any worse than this, I'm going to be all right.
Yeah.
And of course, eventually that they loosened the ropes, and then they gave me some freedom from that. But I use that in life as well. When I get upset, and I don't get upset very much, and I very rarely ever get angry. I'm just really a pretty mellow guy. But when someone cuts me off, on the freeway or that kind of thing that happens to all of us, if we just settle down and sort of coach ourselves and decide, hey, if it doesn't get any worse than this, I'm going to be all right.
Yeah, it's that perspective, right?
Certainly.
Before you were captured, did you have this type of resilient mindset prior to, or was it something you developed under duress?
That's a very good question. And when you change a day at a time, it's tough to really look back and say, well, when did that happen to you? Was there a moment in your life? I grew up a farm kid in Kansas. We didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 7 years old. And so I was rich in many ways, but not materially. I was rich in the family and the unity and the love that I had. And we had a very strong faith in my family. And, we sang together, and it was a very cohesive unit. And so I think I had that foundation when I went into the prison camp. But I think that the torture and the prison experience sort of validated a lot of the principles that I had learned as a child. And of course, one of them, again, was just, self-control. I am the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
The self-control is interesting as a topic, especially in today's world. So there are so many distractions, and the science talks about dopamine. It's that hormone of pleasure. So if someone likes my post or comments on my post, then I get that dopamine hit, right? And we see, and all the studies are illustrating, that drug addiction is on the rise. COVID, alcoholism was on the rise. Obesity is on the rise. A lot of these things are symptomatic of a lack of self-control. So someone who is listening right now, what advice would you give to someone who says, Captain Plumb, I have not developed that self-control muscle. And, we're not going to have anyone be in prison for over 2,100 days, but what tips would you give to develop self-control?
That's a great question. And something I really believe in. Now, my father, World War II era guy, okay, and he was quite a disciplinarian. My mother was a very religious person, and she taught me a lot about forgiveness. And those two items, discipline and forgiveness, would serve me well in the prison camp. I needed them both, seriously. But to give someone advice about discipline, I would say what my father told me. He said, challenges in your life can be very beneficial to you. That if you discipline yourself, you actually will give yourself more options in life. And I didn't believe that at the time, because, to me, the definition of discipline is restriction. When you discipline someone, or even when you discipline yourself, you narrow the guidelines. But what he said was right, was that when you use self-discipline, you have more options. If you discipline yourself to lose weight, if you discipline yourself to stay healthy, then you have a lot more options in life. You don't get diabetes, you don't get problems with your joints, that you do when you're 50 pounds overweight. And so that kind of discipline actually gives you the freedom, I think, of life. And if you can believe that, if you can really believe that, hey, if I can get through these experiences by making the right choices and disciplining myself to stay with the course, and don't deviate from what I know is right. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, is that they know it's right. There's no question about that. It's just they don't have the self-discipline to stay the course.
Yeah, I love what you said, discipline gives you more options. And I'm glad you mentioned diabetes. So my father, who is one of my mentors, he's almost 82, and he listens to every show, and he's an outstanding person. He was an engineer in his career. I was raised with tremendous discipline. I was raised by a very strict grandmother and a very strict father. And we owned a family restaurant. And so we worked 7 days a week, and there wasn't a job in a restaurant I hadn't done, from folding napkins to cleaning toilets, all of it. But you mentioned self-discipline. So both my father and my late mother were type 1 diabetic, Captain Plumb. So I made a decision. I'm turning 50, but everyone knows next year you're all invited. I don't know what I'm doing yet, but it's going to be good. And I refuse to entertain the idea that I too will be diabetic. And so it's about that discipline. And also, and I want to ask you about this, I had to change my identity. I used to be the person that read the menu and looked at the desserts first. So I had to change my identity to someone who didn't identify as someone who even ate dessert. And many of my close friends know I just don't. I don't eat it. I don't like how I feel. So let me ask you this. I read that you forgave your captors, the men who tortured you violently, and you forgave them. How did you do that?
I am a Christian. And of course, forgiveness is a very foundation, I think, of the Christian belief.
Yeah.
But I found in the prison camp, it was more than just a religion to forgive. It was self-preservation. It was survival to forgive. Once we established communication in the prison camp, we were tapping on walls in this secret code that we had developed, and we would pass around patriotic quotes and poetry and Bible verses. And one of the quotes that I got, which was very meaningful in my life, and this is at a time, this is several months into the prison camp, where I was very bitter, just so angry about this enemy that was violating the Geneva Convention and torturing prisoners. And I was the brunt of all this. And I felt like I was the victim of circumstances beyond my control. And Lieutenant Commander Bob Shoemaker, he's an admiral now, was tapping on the wall, and he tapped to me this quote. He said, Charlie, he said, acid does more harm in the vessel it's stored than on the subject it's poured. What that meant to me was that all this vitriol that I harbor in my heart against these people that have been torturing me is going to hurt me more than it hurts them. I'm the vessel storing this acid. And it's, and the irony of the whole thing is, it probably made them feel good if I was killing myself. And I made a promise to myself that moment. I promised myself, if I die in this prison, they got to work for it. I'm not going to kill myself. I'm not going to do the dirty work here. They dragged me out of here feet first, man. They got a job on their hands. I'm not dying because of this attitude that I've got. And so from then on, and this was just a few months into the prison camp, from then on, I forgave everyone, and I continue to do that today. I went back to Vietnam 5 years ago. I had been asked to come back there to see the camp commander, the guy who had been in charge of all of our torture. We called him the Rat. He was a rat. And they asked me a couple of years straight, and I decided I really didn't want to do that. Then they said, well, bring your family and we'll make a vacation for you. And so I took 3 of my 4 kids over there to Hanoi, Vietnam. And I met this guy who'd been in charge of all of our torture. Well, and I think the people that asked me to come thought that I would want to punch this guy out. And I think that my family, my kids, even after, they've been listening to me talk to them for many, many years, thought that I would be very upset to meet the guy who had inflicted all this pain on me. But I had forgiven him a long time ago. And when I saw the guy, he wanted to hug me. And he stepped back and he said, I'm really happy to see that you're alive and well. And my proudest moment, he said, I was your warden, he said, from 1968 to 1972. He said, and my proudest achievement was to keep you happy and healthy. And I said, wait a minute, Bubba, it's me. You don't remember? But you know, he'd gone past it and I'd gone past it, and we became great friends.
I love that you spoke about faith, because I'm a Christian too. So all of our listeners know, and I keep going back to Mark 11, you know, whatever you ask for and pray and believe in and have faith in, you shall receive. If you pray that this mountain be removed and cast into the sea, it'll be cast in the sea. But what everyone forgets is the 26th verse of that, which is, but first you have to forgive. Mm-hmm. So you can have what you want, but you have to forgive. Was there a verse that got you through?
You know, Romans 8:28 was very beneficial, I think. I'd learned some Bible verses, and I started, as a matter of fact, in a prison camp by trying to sing every hymn I could remember. I could remember 72 hymns all the way through. Well, and here's the deal: is that when you have nothing else to do, you have no distractions. You know, you go back through your mind, and it's all there. It's just amazing. But 8:28. It seemed to really resonate with me. All things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, even a prison camp, something here is going to work for good, and all I have to do is love the Lord. This can't be right. I'm going to try to prove this verse. And so I sort of challenged myself to think, whatever could come out positive from a situation like this. And my responsibility is to love the Lord. That's pretty simple. Well, here's an interesting thing. A study was done several years ago about all the combatants of Vietnam. 30.6% have post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Of the prisoners of war, 4% of us have PTSD. And it's mostly the guys who were shot down near the end of the war and were only prisoners for a few weeks or a month or two. And so we've gone, 591 guys came home. We've gone to be CEOs of major corporations. We have 17 generals and 7 admirals. Most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We have 2 United States senators, 2 ambassadors from our number, a governor, several mayors, a vice presidential candidate, a presidential candidate, my old flight instructor, John McCain. And they're telling us today we're healthier mentally and physically than if we hadn't been shot down and captured. So things do work together for good. Even in a prison camp, things work together for good. And all you have to do is love the Lord.
Well, amen to that. And Senator McCain, so I live not far from where he and Cindy used to live, about 2 miles away, I guess. Yep. And one of the reasons my husband and I were able to immigrate to the US is because of Senator McCain. So it was, I was very sad when he passed, and and that's a whole other story. When we're talking about shifting our identity, in the prison camp, you shifted your identity. You became a chaplain. So it could have gone so many ways. I'm still a soldier. I'm a son. I'm a victim. You had a whole buffet of choices, Captain Plumb, in which to say, this is my identity right now. But you chose to serve. And that became your identity. How did you do that? How did you go from that person who is bitter and angry and being tortured to say, well, I'm here, I'm going to serve everyone?
Very good question. I'm not sure I can even answer that. It was sort of a matter of needs. I could see that there are a number of guys in that prison camp who needed a baseline. They had lost all the material things. Look, when you're a fighter pilot, and most of us were, you live a high flying, fast life. We were jet fighter pilots zooming around at the speed of sound, living the life, the Top Gun life. And suddenly in a descent in a parachute of 2 or 3 minutes, our life was changed from king of the skies to scum of the earth. And so folks didn't have the fancy airplane. They didn't have the nice uniform. They didn't have the baseline that they needed. And so I saw this need, and I saw that guys were sort of floundering. And I thought, well, if there's any way that I can give them hope. I'd had a little bit of instruction, I'm not ordained, but I had some instruction at the Naval Academy in the Officers Christian Union. There aren't enough chaplains to go aboard every naval ship. And so they were training us to be lay leaders aboard ships where chaplains weren't available. And so I knew a little bit about the structure. I challenged a bunch of my Catholic buddies in the prison camp. They were the ones that knew all the Bible verses. They'd been through the catechism and everything, and so they supplied the Bible for me in memory, and so I set to work, and it was very interesting to see the mood of these guys turn around when they had something to stand on, something solid, because everything solid is gone. Everything that you think is real, that you can see and feel and taste and experience is gone, and you have nothing, and so you grasp, for this effort. I think it's the same thing in life. Sometimes when you're diagnosed with a terrible disease, or you go through a divorce, and suddenly you're just sort of hanging in that parachute. You're looking up at the panel that's holding you in the sky and looking down at the unknown, and you're scared to death. And so it was just that need for a foundation that I saw, and that if I could provide that, then it was a service that I felt blessed, actually, to be able to provide that service.
That's beautiful. And I hope everyone who's listening really gets that concept that no matter what you're going through in your business or your life, maybe you're going through a divorce or the loss of a family member or an illness or a downturn in your business, there is always a way to serve, especially when you don't feel like it. And that changes everything. I want to shift gears. So we have entrepreneurs of all ages who follow the show. So I've had, 12-year-old entrepreneurs. We were talking about Harvey McKay, my mentor. Harvey's turning 90 soon. I can't even believe it. I want to hear your best tips, because you're writing, you're speaking, you're out there. What are your best tips for someone who wants to, I guess, have an encore career, regardless of their age?
Basically, find a need and fill it. When I came home, and people asked me to tell my story, I said, it's a very boring story. You don't want to hear this. Find somebody that swam the English Channel or climbed Mount Everest. There's a story for you. But spending nearly 6 years in a little bitty prison cell, there's no story there. I truly did not think I wrote my autobiography early on, and a guy came to me and said, you need to write your story. I said, it's not a story. This is just a very boring time of my life. It's a time that I wanted to forget. No, you write the story. Well, my book is in its 34th printing now because he convinced me that I had something to say. So what I found was early on, in fact, I was still in the hospital recovering, and they asked me to a little press conference, and so I was surrounded by 150 photographers and reporters, and this is just a couple of weeks after I came home. And I told my story, and on my way up to the hospital room, the elevator doors closed, but not before a young reporter had sneaked in, and I nose to nose with this young guy in this crowded elevator in the hospital going up to my room, and he was crying. The guy had lines of anguish in his brow and tears in his eye. And he said, "Mr. Plumb, he said, you really got to me in there, man. I've had a miserable year. My family is falling apart. My job is just terrible." He said, "I even wondered if I wanted to go on living." He said, "You've given me hope." Well, I didn't quite know how to respond to that because I hadn't really intended to give anybody any hope. I'm just telling a boring story here. but it told me this, that there is a reason, that there is a purpose, that there is an intent here. And if I can give somebody hope, then it's almost a calling, it's necessary for me if I had that ability, if I can help somebody out, certainly I would give them hope. And in fact, and so that was the impetus for my starting to speak. And I've spoken over 5,000 times since that day. And of course, written books and articles all over, just because that guy told me that I had something to say that I didn't think I had to say. Find a need. And that was the need that I found, that the connection between my story and stories of everyday life. Because, see, I don't think you have to be in a prison camp to be lonely. I don't think you have to be in a prison camp to lose communication with your loved ones. I don't think you have to be in a prison camp to feel like you've failed at your mission. We all do that. That's part of the life process.
It's so true. There are so many people who are lonely. They're on social media. They're surrounded by opportunities to connect, but they're not connected. Mm-hmm. So I have a final question for you, and I have a whole bunch of notes. Oh my goodness. I knew you were amazing, but oh my goodness. Anyway, so going back to Harvey, he called me a couple of years ago and he's like, Susan, I just finished every item on my bucket list. And he said, I went, wow. And he said, there were 150 items. And I said, okay. He goes, ask me what I'm going to do next. I said, what are you going to do next? He said, I'm writing another one. And so I'm a big believer. One of the things for when I turn 50, I actually do know what I'm doing. I've committed myself to learning 50 new things. Mm-hmm. I've almost died several times. I'm a Boston Marathon bombing survivor. I did a lot of forgiveness and prayer over the 2 young men who did that. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, how fun turning 50. I'm going to learn. I'm going to have 50 new experiences. So let me ask you this. If you had some items on your bucket list that people might be a bit surprised about, what would they be?
Wow. I've done most everything in life I've wanted to do. I have lived and I continue to live a very active, beautiful life. I've never been to Saudi Arabia. That's on my bucket list. I have 4 grandchildren now, obviously, and I'd like to be able to teach them to fly. Flying is a very spiritual experience for me. When I first got my wings, I told you about my mother, a very simplistic person, not very well educated. And when I first got my Navy wings and went by to see her, and I was so proud, and she was proud of me as well. But she said, son, when you're up there flying your jet so high, do you feel closer to God? And I thought to myself, silly lady, God's not necessarily up there in the sky. He's all over. Of course, I didn't say that, but that's how I felt. Well, the longer I live, the more wisdom I see in that, because when I fly and look down at the earth, there's no evil here. There's no filth. There's no homeless. It's beautiful up there. And I really feel like that mentally I'm closer to God, and my mother was right.
Oh, they often are. At least that's what I tell my children. Your mother's often right. Well, Captain Charlie Plumb, thank you so much for being here. And I love that right after this, you're going to be soaring up there in the sky, looking down at the beauty. And as Mark Divine said, we all have to retain hope. And at times this world can feel very dark, but regardless, without hope, the people perish. That's so true. Thank you, Captain Plumb, for being here. And I would love for everyone to connect. You can go to Amazon.com and find Captain Plumb's books. And you can also
there's a better way, if you will. I
Sure.
autograph every book that's ordered from my office. So charlieplumb.com, and I'll personally autograph every book that's ordered from that one. So it's CHARLIEPLUMB.com.
And we will include that in the show notes.
Okay.
I'm about to place an order. So to my,
don't place an order. I'll send you an autographed copy, Susan.
well, thank you.
And wish you a happy birthday.
Well, thank you so much, Captain Plumb. Thank you, everyone, for being here. If this show has lifted your heart and given you some hope, Captain Plumb and I would love for you to share it. Go ahead and tag us on social. And with that, God bless. Go rock your day, and I will see you in the next episode.